Okay, so today is the 16th of February 2023. We're going to be doing a quick update on the FBX import, the issues we've been tackling, and the steps that were taken to kind of get them resolved. Okay, so at the moment you're looking at an asset here that has been brought in from Unity into Houdini, and the pivot point is not at origin. That's perfectly fine. It's just more the principle of if you do the import, you need to accommodate the whole principle that uh, in some instances the pivot point was set by the author of the asset at origin, and for some they don't. And you don't automatically get that information when you pull it in, when you export it from Unity and then pull it across. Remember, this is FBX settings. So if they're custom settings that have been made within Unity, you're not going to just automatically get them into that application. You need to write specific logic to interpret what you're working with, and then yeah, work with it like that. So in this instance here, I've been using the bounds component, which will give me the extents, and then asking it for the centroid, which is going to give me a vector at the center of that asset, and that's how I'm reverse engineering it to get the pivot point information, right? But again, in some instances, this is resting. A matter of fact, 90% of the instances, it's resting at 000. But in some instance, the author probably dragged the asset up on the y-axis and then freeze transformations. So the asset looks like it's resting at 0 0 when you actually go and interrogate it in Unity. I'll just head over there now. Um, and then in some instances not. So right now I'm looking at MRV2 number one. And if I come over here, MRV2 number one, we open the asset. And again, the asset is up on the y-axis, but if you check the coordinate information for the position, it's been zeroed out. And that seems quite logical. And a lot of the time, you take this kind of thing for second nature. You don't think about it. It's just an asset. But in my instance, I'm taking the FBX from Unity and discovering what has been done in the authoring tool, which wouldn't be Unity, and trying to recreate it so that I can regenerate the scene in Houdini. So, right, so we're looking at this here, and the asset, like I mentioned, has been raised, and for the majority of these, it has. And then for some of them, you'll find them that they're just sitting at 0 0, especially if it's just like a base mesh like this. It's going to be sitting at 0 0, and the pivot point is going to be at the same location. And so code has gone in to make sure that that has been accounted for. And then in the special instances where I need to apply that, I identify it visually within Houdini and then place that asset, the prefab name, in this list, and then make sure that the rotation that is necessary to kind of align it with what's happening in Unity is here, and that's 90 degrees. So that's where we're going to be setting those values. And then here on this side here, the same asset, I'm recording the position information on the Y, and I'm also putting in this override value on the Y as well, right? So that's just for the prefab list, not for the scene list, because the scene is going to be pointing at that prefab in Houdini. So it's not something that I need to take into account twice. Once you get it right in the source location for the asset, it'll just automatically flow, right? So let's head back over to Houdini, and we've talked through the issues that we've encountered. Um, what I've not mentioned here is what that might actually look like with the asset coming through. So far the scripts, because this has been auto-generated for us, right? Or actually, we're writing the code to auto-generate it for us. And so this component here, transformation component, is we have the actual the values for the centroid written out to the pivot translation uh, as a vector, and then the inverse of those values is applied to the actual translation, and that will move the asset from wherever it is in the file. Remember, the file is not a one-to-one file between the geometry and the file. No, there could be like 100 assets in this one file, and they're spread out everywhere, right? And we need to we need to break that asset up and get it into its individual pieces so that we can recreate the scene by referring to individual assets and getting them to their location, right? So that's what's taking place here, and then the next step is just the actual translation and the rotation. So remember where we're saying here that we have the Y for the position, and we also have the Y for the rotation, and we have values coming in here, and those are being applied in this secondary transformation. So just to highlight where I'm getting the logic put in for that. So here is the prefab load logic. And I talked through some of this other bits of script earlier. We still need to clean it up. But this location right here, let's just find it. So we're saying if the Y position is not 0, or the actual the rotation override Y value is not 0, then in those scenarios, then we'll go ahead and execute this bit of logic, which is looking at that transform that I just showed you, and we're setting for the translate Y what that value is, and the rotation Y, we're setting that value. And that's as much as we really need to be focused for as far as that bit of the workflow. The other situation that we need to take into account, so I'm just going to close this down. So right now, this is where we are in terms of actually getting the scene loaded. I'm just going to isolate a section of logic that's been coded. All right. So if I go over to Trello, this is where things were yesterday, right? Or actually even earlier this morning. So there, as you can see, there's some holes in the scene there for the geometry. The majority of it's loaded, but why are there holes, right? So there's some missing geo. We've cleaned up that bit of logic. But the orientation, there's still some orientation issues. And I'm going to highlight what that is now. So here we are, a better load as far as this specific scene is concerned. We're also highlighting where the code changes went to make that work. And so let's go back to the actual scene itself. Now, right here, this bit of geometry here is sticking out. And I know that that needs to be oriented different. It needs to be rotated by 90 degrees, right? So I can go ahead and click on that. And that tells me that LR73 is what needs to be rotated. But there's an issue. This is not the only place that this asset's being used. And I have noted earlier today that if I go ahead and correct that, if you notice, when I hover over that, it's highlighting the other scenes that is using the same asset. Well, that's a problem, right? So if I go ahead and orient it correctly here, it's going to change the orientation. And as you can notice, for those other instances of this asset, they're working perfectly fine, right? So the question is, why would you have 100 instances somewhere else where the rotation works fine and not here? Because remember, everything's generic. So if I go ahead and flip that by 90 degrees, that's going to flip it at 90 degrees at the other locations where it works fine, and then those will be out of sync. Those will be incorrect. So I'm going to demonstrate that now so that we have a reference to kind of highlight what that issue is. So right, so we're looking for LR703. Okay, so this is the asset, right? And let's go in and edit that. So come in here. This is just the pivot information and the translation information to, or the positioning information to get it to 0, 0. We have no additional translation. And if I go ahead, now remember, we can see that it has an issue at 0, 0, right? Not at 0, 0, sorry. We have an issue in terms of its instancing in the scene, and that's what we need to kind of adjust for. So I'm going to put in that 90 degrees now. It's flipped. Now let's go back to the scene and see what that looks like. Right. So here's the asset. It's now looking more correct. Now let's see if I can see what it looks like at the other locations. Now here we have another instance here. That's now not oriented correctly. That piece is not oriented correctly. It's the same asset. So we looked at, let me just highlight it to be certain. LR7, number 3. LR7, number 3. So it looks really good now for that scene, but it's broken everywhere else. So it might be a case that I need to take this on an instance by instance basis, and instead of doing the translation at the prefab level, accommodate for that at the scene level. The only issue I can see with that is there are hundreds of these across multiple scenes, and you only have 2 eyes, right? So we're going to have fun trying to get a solution for that, but that's literally where we are right now. So I've talked through the code, I've talked through the pivot point issue, what's going on with the prefab, loading of the prefab, extracting the prefab information, extracting the scene information, getting that in, and this specific issue as far as actually making sure that everything's coordinated and oriented correctly when we actually come to load the scene. So wish us luck, update to follow. Hopefully we can get this done by close of play. If not today, tomorrow. All right. Thanks again.